So excited to be speaking to Arturo Desimone, who is based in Argentina. He is a writer, an artist, a political activist. He's a member of Llamamiento Argentino Judío. And he's going to be talking to us today about something that is not spoken about by Israel or by Israel defenders. A lot of people obviously have picked up this refrain of October 7th being the biggest massacre of Jews since the Holocaust. But Arturo has a different understanding of that. Can you tell us about your relationship to the Holocaust, your family's relationship to the Holocaust?
My political interpretation of things are my own, not my parents' interpretations, but my grandfather narrowly eluded the Holocaust or the invasion of Poland, and most of his extended family ended up in Treblinka, among other places, the ghetto of Częstochowa. And so, since I grew up in the Caribbean, where there's no real Holocaust education, I had to study this matter on my own. I read texts like, for example, Das Licht on the internet, which was about the tests that were conducted in concentration camps, memoirs that I could find, and not limited to the Spielberg accounts of history, not Steven Spielberg. And so after that, and my father was from the dictatorship of the late 70s. He was not Jewish, but he was a musician who had to leave because of the circumstances that were menacing. And so I had to try to digest all this history on my own, more or less. And so I tried to talk to whichever relatives had knowledge about this and to understand. And it became very clear also that there is a very strong continuum between the junta of the 1970s in Argentina, its propaganda, its methods of violence, and the Nazi regime. The continuity is clear. What's less well known also was the fate of the Jewish community, and particularly Jewish dissidents in Argentina, which has one of the largest in what they call today the global South. Argentina has the largest Jewish diaspora community. So I tried to research this history on my own. I went to Poland, to the village where these ancestors were from. I spoke to people, I kept diaries, I wrote about this, even made drawings about this. And the pictures I took, I lost, which is a shame, because just when I got there, someone sent me an email saying that they had just vandalized the cemetery of Częstochowa. And so some security guards, they dropped me off alone in a very vast, ruinous cemetery that had been vandalized a few days before. And everywhere on these very beautiful, cracked graves were painted swastikas, David stars hanging from nooses, as a common stick figure that they paint. These, I guess, very angry young Poles who seek to blame the Jews for communism, I suppose, still do. And so I explored that a bit. And so it's always been a topic of personal reflection. Was October 7th the major or the largest pogrom? It depends on how you add things up, how you disaggregate things. So Argentina has the largest diaspora community in the global South, as we call it today, since we no longer use the term third world, we say global South. So in the third world, Argentina had the largest Jewish community, and about roughly 20% or more of the young people who were forcibly targeted for disappearance, meaning they were detained and their remains were never found, Their deaths were unconfirmed, but it's almost certain that they were tortured to death. 20% of these disappeared were from the Jewish community. Of course, the prime motivation for this policy, the prime motivation was not because of their ethnicity, but rather because of their political activity, because of their opinions, because of their active in different political organizations of the left, of the center left, of the secular nationalist left. So for that reason alone, people in both the center, mainstream, and the right of Argentinian politics have always insisted that their being Jewish had nothing to do with their persecution. And even the mainstream Jewish representative organization, the Daya, which I guess is the equivalent maybe of something like ADL or B'nai B'rith or something in the United States, the Daya, which is an official organ of representation and also connects the local community to Israel, they fell into infamy because they tried to downplay the rumors of anti-Semitism, and they ignored when many mothers of young disappeared Jewish people came to their offices, to their attorneys, to plead for some form of help. And the answer that they got was that their children were either not assimilated enough or did not have sufficient Zionist education, and for that reason got into so much trouble. But the notion that their being Jewish had nothing to do with the way they were tortured, had nothing to do with the way they were abused, had nothing to do with the fact that Jewish martyrs of these events called the process, el proceso in Argentina, were disproportionately larger than the number of the ratio of Jewish victims, or whatever you want to call it. Sometimes they don't like to be called victims because they were active politically, but the ratio of the dead and disappeared who were Jewish were just disproportionate, since it's a very tiny minority in Argentina, as it is in almost any other country other than Israel. And so this was disproven not by very nuanced investigations or not by some kind of deconstruction theory. This was disproven by the simple fact that there were many swastikas being worn, there were many pictures of Hitler, and Israeli officials and functionaries recounts in books and in memoirs by figures like by Argentine journalists and scholars from back then and now, from Jacobo Timerman to Lautaro Bradsky, among other scholars, Hermann Schiller. They all recounted that containing their disgust at seeing a lot of Nazi paraphernalia. At Miriam Lewin, who was one of the key witnesses in the human rights trials of 1985, upon which the recent film, which I think is a very mediocre movie, but the recent movie, 1985, Argentina 1985, was based largely on her testimony and the testimony of a few others. And Miriam Lewin, or Mariam Lewin, was obviously Jewish. She testified how she was tortured in cells that had pictures of the Führer, had pictures of Hitler. Also, there was a great scandal that has been forgotten since then around the figure of Jacobo Timerman, the father of someone who became an important politician of the populist center left in Argentina. But Jacobo Timerman had been a Zionist, and he had been a deputy editor for a newspaper called La Opinión. La Opinión was part of the media corporation owned by a Jewish family of the press called David Greifer in Argentina. And so David Greiver's press organ was greatly envied by people who wanted to have a media monopoly in Argentina, and who today have a media monopoly, the Grupo Clarín they're called. And they wanted to remove certain enemies from the market. And one of those enemies was David Greiver, who he was disappeared. His wife, who was non-Jewish, was told by her interrogators, how could you have married someone so impure? And his children were largely harassed or disappeared. His property and his wealth were confiscated. And Jacobo Timerman, during many, many interrogations, was faced with the abject anti-Semitism of its interrogators. For example, they would recite quotations from the protocols of the elders of Zion to him. And also, they were believers in a popular conspiracy theory at the time, which was invented by someone called Walter Bernavaggi Allende. His name has nothing to do with Chile.
Right.
And
not the good Allende.
Yes. Walter Allende was a fanatical anti-Peronist nationalist anti-Semite who I think he came across and distorted a part of the history of the Zionist movement. As you may well know, the Zionist movement from the outset was not convinced that Palestine was the place to be, because Zionism at first, wanted to see itself as a secularizing movement. Palestine was much too close to Europe, where all the historical enemies of the Jewish people were. So they were thinking about Argentina, which was an immense immigrant country with large regions that were good for agriculture, better for agriculture than Palestine. And so there was a time when there was a wave of Zionists who wanted to build little communes in the Patagonia, but afterwards that was not decided upon, and they moved to Palestine. So the conspiracy theorists and a member of a Nazi circle, or of a neo-Nazi circle, Walter Bernavaggi Allende, he was a school teacher who became a university professor thanks to dictatorships, and he promoted a conspiracy theory called Plan Andina, which claimed that the Jews want to take over all of Argentina, particularly the Patagonia, and they want to kill all the people who live there, and which is actually what people who the dictatorship defended actually did that, not the Jewish community at all. But this conspiracy called Plan Andina, which claims that the Jews want to take over Argentina for themselves and kill everyone living there, was very popular in circles of the police corps. And so Jacobo Timerman, who was a very important journalist, was constantly being questioned about Plan Andina and how they intended to carry it out. And it's a very stereotypical anti-Semitic conspiracy theory. Maybe it sounds obscure to your viewers because it's so much about Patagonia, but it really is like any classical anti-Semitic idea you'd get from Russia or Ukraine or Germany. So that really disproved the idea that anti-Semitism did not form an important part of the way of thinking or of the world's view of the officials of the dictatorship. It was actually very much infused into their daily language, and there were special kinds of torture that were specifically reserved for Jews and to humiliate Jews. And Jewish fighters, Jewish young men who were drafted to fight in the Falklands War also were systematically humiliated in the Falklands for being Jewish in ways that are, quite disgusting. Like they were used for boxing practice, things that would actually reading of the details about it in the book by Brodsky reminded me actually of some of the things that are being done to Palestinians right now. And one of the tortures in the dungeons of the dictatorship was to prop a live rat into the orifices of a man or a woman in the case of a man, into the anus, in the case of a woman, into her sex organs. And this was, they were especially fond.
So I just want to say something. Sorry, sorry, say that again. Sorry, I cut you off.
They were especially fond of doing this to Jews.